The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast, where we explore mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. My name is Jonathan Busfield. I'm here, as always, with my co-host, John Cuna. Today we're going to be discussing Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and relationships. So most people, we're from Boston, so most people don't need the rundown of who Tom Brady is, who Bill Belichick is. I think most sports fans probably don't need that. But, to give a quick recap, obviously they were on the same team for a while, Brady being the quarterback, Belichick being the coach. I think it was 2000 when Brady was drafted, 199, I think, sixth round, right? For the Patriots. Belichick was the coach at that time, still is. Played on the Patriots for about, I think 20 years? Yeah, 20 years until he recently decided, I think it was before last season, to pack his bags and go to not quite Tampa. Yeah, not quite South Beach, but close, Tampa. Yeah. So I think this came up recently because it was the game that happened. When this episode airs, it's going to be a little bit past it, but there was a game recently where Tom Brady came back to Gillette Stadium in Foxborough for the first time as a member of a team that's not the Patriots. Yep. And obviously that's a big deal, in terms of what that means for the fans here, what that means for Belichick, what that means for Brady. And it led to a lot of, week-long or multiple week-long kind of things in the media, which we're going to get to. But I thought we could start a little bit just, with an overview of their time together, things accomplished, and just how hard it is to do what they did. So obviously they won 6 Super Bowls together, played together for 20 years, navigated a lot of drama and a lot of difficult things, right? There was Spygate, there was Deflategate, there was, just the fact that they're both very driven, very specific individuals in terms of how they do things. But obviously a very successful relationship. And I think it's an example of how just relationships in general are very hard. Especially when you're trying to do difficult things, it's hard to always get along perfectly and have everything be fine. I'll kick it to you, Johnny. What are your thoughts on just, reflecting on those two doing what they did for 20 years and maybe how people view it from the outside versus what we probably think is going on within their relationship?
Yeah, I think you get probably 2 different perspectives. You get the New England perspective of what the relationship was, and then you get the outsider perspective that it was, Belichick had his thumb on Brady and wouldn't let him do anything and things like that, which we can get into a little bit. But, it's interesting that, their relationship for 20 years went through you mentioned, a lot of stress tests, right? Like Deflategate and Spygate and all these different things. And, a lot of other things just within the team happened that they had to sort of manage, and they did in a professional capacity. And we'll never know until someone writes the book what happened behind closed doors. But I think from a fan's perspective and just like an outside perspective, I feel like they managed it relatively well. And in Boston, and sports media loves to twist things into different ways, so it's hard to get an accurate picture of what actually maybe was going on. If you listen to Felger and Maz, it was like this terrible relationship that was awful and no one was getting along and it was just awful. But I don't really believe that was the case. Even at the end of the game with Belichick and Brady, they hugged for a half a second, and people were like, oh, he's snuffing him or things like that. And I was like, well, actually, no. Then they met in the locker room for 35 minutes afterwards and we're talking about different things. So I think that plays a big part. But it's impressive what they've been able to do, what they were able to do for 20 years of being able to manage all of those different things, right? A 20-year relationship just separate from being in the spotlight is impressive, keeping a relationship for 20 years. But especially when it's every little decision or behavior is under a microscope. When you're the best at what you do, and both of those, and this is not a biased opinion, this is just fact. So you come on the show and dispute me, but when you have the two greatest people at what they do together, it can be difficult, and it's going to draw a lot of skepticism and criticism. And I think that they did a pretty exceptional job at that. I think that it was perfect all the time? No. Do I think that they argued behind closed doors? Absolutely. Do I think that there was some stuff that came up when they was transitioning away? Sure. Right. But I think that they were able to handle a relationship in a different, in a relatively healthy way, at least from the outside perspective. I didn't see anything that was like overtly passive aggressive or negative or anything like that. And I think that speaks to both of them, and it speaks to that their relationship was around like winning football games, and I think that's something that helped them.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like people take snippets of what they see, and they make this leap, this assumption that means the relationship was bad, which is strange to me. It's almost like saying that if someone grieves the loss of a loved one, then that means they weren't happy when they were together. It's like the same kind of ballpark for me. Like you're saying you did difficult things for 20. These two did difficult things for 20 years, and then on the heels of that, there was some difficult emotion when things had to go a different direction. Like that's a very healthy response. That's a normal response.
Right.
I think it reflects how amazing 20 years was. It doesn't indicate that 20 years was a bunch of crap.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the opposite of that. So I agree with you. It's interesting because the book just came out. I think it just came out last week. A book by Seth Wickersham, which is like I think he writes for. I'm gonna get this wrong. It might be The Atlantic or something like that, or maybe he might have worked for ESPN for a while. I apologize, I should know that, but I think he worked for ESPN, and he had a lot of in-depth knowledge over the last few years about, allegedly in-depth knowledge about what was going on in Foxborough between amongst that team and between Belichick and Brady specifically, and Kraft, and came out with a book that I think goes into some of these things. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know, but I know that is supposed to be the most in-depth window in that we've had so far. So it'll be interesting to read that a little bit and see what kind of comes out of it. But I agree with you. I feel like people, whether it's Felger and Maz or other people, they tend to look at little things on the screen during a football game and blow that up to make assumptions about what that means. So if they get into a little sideline spat, or if they don't seem to like talk to each other, like at the end of the game recently is a great example. Like Belichick gives him like a half a millisecond hug, and they walk off. Right now, people like Felger and Maz are going to say like, "See, it's like they don't care about each other. They hate each other, whatever."
Right.
And then, like you said, off the camera, Belichick intentionally waits and goes in and is in the Tampa Bay locker room with Brady alone, one-on-one, for a half an hour.
Right.
So it's like obviously these are two people that really care about each other, and just because you care about each other doesn't guarantee anything, right? I think that's where look, I don't know about you, but the experience I draw to this is like having roommates who are friends in college or like after college. It's like even people you really care about and love piss you off after. It's like, if you live together and you're around each other, you're going to strike a nerve at times. It's just impossible not to. And that's just living together and living life.
Yeah.
This is like an example of like Brady and Belichick are an example of trying to do something at the top of your field that is incredibly difficult. And anytime you're trying to accomplish incredibly difficult things, you have to push the limits. You're not going to agree, and there's going to be things that like moments where, because you're both trying to elevate each other, that you strike a nerve and one person disagrees or whatever. Like that's bound to happen. I almost think it kind of has to happen, and I think it can strengthen your relationship if anything. So I guarantee that 20 years of them together, those 20 years were strengthened by difficult conversations that they had. Not the opposite. People like avoid difficult conversations. I think that tends to really hurt the relationship and probably lead to an earlier exit than if they just had it to begin with.
I couldn't agree more. I think, the concept that we talk about of like confirmation bias, which is basically you look and seek information that will confirm your own beliefs, right? So if you're someone who thinks negatively about Brady and negatively about Belichick, that's the only information you're going to really like retain is like those little like spats on the sideline or the the snuff of the hug at the end of that game on Sunday. That for you will be like, see, I told you it was a terrible thing, rather than maybe hearing it all the way out and like, oh, actually they just wanted a more private moment. They didn't want to have a conversation in front of millions of people. They wanted to keep that separate, which I think speaks to just the relationship that we've seen for the last 20 years. And then the other one that you brought up too about like difficult conversations, I think this is one of the hardest parts when we talk about relationships just in general, that arguments are a crucial part of growth. And if you can't argue appropriately, relationships tend to end. And, I used to do a lot of work with, creating relationships and things like that especially with young kids, because I think that, it's like when I was having lots of conversations with them, we got into a fight, so we're not friends anymore. It's like, well, what was the fight about? Well, they wanted to do this and I wanted to do this. So we got into a fight and now we're not friends. It's like, well, there's actually some real opportunity there to work through some different things. And what you find is that through difficult conversations or through healthy arguments, you actually grow and strengthen the bond, because then you know how to do that in the future.
Exactly.
You show a little bit of vulnerability with that person, and you show a little bit of trust with that person. And like arguments are sort of like that key piece to growth in relationships, because there are always going to be hiccups along the road with any relationship, even if it's the best relationship ever. And if you're disillusioning yourself to the fact that like if an argument means the end, you're cheapening the relationship, and you're ending something that probably could have been really great had you just worked through that in an appropriate way. And that's a lot of the stuff that you and I do with helping people with like building relationships. And I think that I can't imagine that the two of them never got into an argument, right? I know we've heard reports of different things or arguments, and I think it's because they're both highly competitive and they want what's best and they have their ideas of what that would look like. But they're sort of proof that you can be in an effective relationship with arguments, and nobody can really dispute their resume at this point. So it clearly worked for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, you bring up some really good points. I mean, I think when it comes to this type of situation, right, like in terms of whether arguments are possible or needed or that kind of thing, I think there's like a bit of a spectrum, right? We don't want arguments to go so far that they're so frequent and so violent or like really over the top in terms of stepping over boundaries with inappropriateness or that kind of thing.
Right.
To the point where that is going to absolutely dismantle the relationship, because that goes beyond trust building and that kind of thing. But a lot of people sort of edge towards the other side and they totally avoid all arguments. And that doesn't lead to any kind of growth, because it may be easier in the short term, right? Because it affords you the opportunity to not have stress and not have difficult conversations that feel uncomfortable, but you are missing opportunities to build that foundation and build the first level and build the second level of that trust, of that growth together by avoiding that topic. And it tends to build resentment, right? If you don't bring it up, that's gonna eat away at you at the inside. So then you're gonna actually, instead of growing with that person, learning a lot about them, trusting them more, them trusting you more, you're now growing resentful towards them. And that is the beginning of the end. When that starts to happen, if you don't resolve that by actually being open and having that conversation, it just eats away at the person, and then nothing really good happens.
Right. And then the next argument, it comes back anyway, right? Like it's just like a boomerang. You could chuck it for a little while, but that thing's coming back.
No, totally.
And it always comes back when another issue comes up or something else comes up. Or if the other person tries to say, hey, this is something that's bothering me, then it's like, well, this has been, and then you're not talking about the actual issue that was brought up, and it always goes sour.
Exactly. And so I think it's a lot of it ties back into expectations, which I think that we talk about quite a bit. A lot of people have expectations that if my relationship is healthy, that should mean I'm not arguing, right? That's an expectation. I think it's false. Like that isn't. If your relationship is healthy, it means you are having arguments at the right time in the right way. That's to me how I would correct that sentence, because I think timing matters and demeanor matters. So we don't want to be having it too often and in a demeanor that's completely disrespectful, but we don't want to have no arguments and just the absence of demeanor or anything. It's got to be in the middle, and you got to pick. You got to try to pick the right time. I think we've talked about this in maybe a past episode where I think it was the Ertz and the relationship episode where we talked about most people wait, like you said, until the scab's ripped off, and then they say, I'm glad you brought this up. I've been meaning to tell you suck in this way. And and then they just go off on each other and nothing. It's just throwing bombs, right? Nothing's accomplished by that. Whereas most people avoid the time that they should have arguments constructively, which is when things are going well. But when things are going well, or when you have things going well means you've had a good week together. It could also mean on a day when things tend to be a little bit easier, less stressful for both people, like weekend or a Sunday or that kind of thing. That's when you should have a discussion that's difficult, because you're both primed to actually like learn and have a little bit of a tolerance for stress and difficulty.
Yep.
Most people look at that and they say, well, I don't want to ruin a good Sunday.
We're having a great day.
Exactly.
Why ruin it?
Why would I ruin that?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you have to take that opportunity to have that conversation then, because it's the best time. It gives you the best chance to be successful.
Right. Yep. You're not emotionally charged. You're thinking clearly, right? And you have an opportunity to have a productive conversation.
Exactly. So I totally agree with you. And you touched on something that relates to like just the difficulty of what they're doing. I feel like when you have highly competitive, highly talented, highly capable individuals, both combining forces to try to do something very difficult, there are going to be moments where like the margin for error is so narrow that both people are going to they're going to be getting their angle to try to do things the right way. So Brady's going to have his thoughts, Belichick's going to have his thoughts. And I'm willing to bet neither of them want to give a whole lot of ground because they're very confident in their position.
Right.
And so if their position, I would bet they aligned way more often than they didn't align. Right.
Agree.
Probably like 97%, 98% of the time. But those 2% of the time, I bet it was difficult conversations. You know.
Yeah.
I think the one thing the fans probably don't see is that fans and media, they either don't see or they choose to ignore, is that for every difficult conversation, there is the 98% or 99% of when things are going well or they're bonding or they're off camera and they're laughing. I mean, everything I've heard from players that have played for Belichick say that he's actually like a very down-to-earth, funny guy. He gives the media his
stoic
spiel, you know, because he's
Ron to Cincinnati.
Yeah, exactly. He's playing chess. Like, he's not going to give anything away.
No.
So he knows what the media's job is. It's to try to get underneath the skin and get inside information. That's what they're trying to do.
Yep.
They get paid to do that. That's fine, right?
Yep.
I don't think he takes it personally.
No.
But he's not going to let them provide a disadvantage for him competitively because his goal is to win a Super Bowl, right?
Yeah. He's there to win championships, not, satisfy the media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So leading up to the game Sunday night, the game, at this point would probably be 2 weeks after the game, but when Brady came back to Foxborough for Tampa Bay to play the Patriots, for at least a week, it was probably a few weeks, there was a lot of stuff in the media, just regurgitating everything. And I think,
oh God,
I don't blame.
Exhausting.
It is exhausting. I don't blame the media. I don't blame the fans. Like we talked about before, media has their job. They have to pick apart things and create narratives.
Sure,
that's what makes them money. I mean, that's what they have to do. I get it. I don't take it personally. I don't blame them.
Yep.
Fans are going to be fans, so they're going to be irrational. If you're a Patriots fan, you're going to be like, F you to everybody on Twitter. If you're a non-Patriots fan, it's Belichick cheated, Brady, whatever. Right. That's pretty much how it kind of crosses down the line. So I don't really blame them. I think part of what you see wrapped up in that is that you see a lot of people trying to figure out which one is better. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't blame them. It's in my opinion, it's a stupid argument because it's like they're both amazing, right? And they do totally different things. Coaching and quarterbacking are not the same thing.
Who was the reason for the wins? Exactly. Right? Was it Belichick or Brady? And exactly.
I've never understood that. Like, I understand it because it's fans. And fans are going to fan. That's what they're going to do.
It's just a talking point that's popular.
It's a talking point.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even rule out, like, I wanted to get your opinion on this. Like, these days, what I've noticed is on, whether it's not as much on Instagram, but Twitter especially, a lot of times it goes beyond fandom. I think what I've noticed is that people post that stuff because they're trying to get activity. If they get activity, they get followers. If they get followers, they get more notoriety, right? Like, there's an angle, there's an incentive for people on Twitter to be saying things that are going to up their following. Yeah. Right. And I think that goes beyond typical fandom is like just being irrational and like getting sucked into an argument that is stupid. I've noticed that this goes beyond that, where it's like you can tell people know exactly what's going to stir up the hornet's nest, and they just throw it out there because they're like, the more people I get exchanging comments on my thread, the more it helps me. Right. And so that's one thing that I think plays into what happened up to the leading up to the game Sunday night. So I wanted to talk about, in terms of their relationship, right? We talked about how it went 20 years. They probably had a lot of moments where things were difficult that helped them grow.
Yeah.
Do you see on either side, Brady's or Belichick's side, anything that you think from an outside perspective, you're like, that was a missed opportunity where if he had adapted or done things a little differently, it probably would have been more fair or would have helped them go beyond 20 years?
It's an interesting question. In terms of like feeling that Brady left because of some unsettledness piece around that?
In terms of either way, right? I think that the outcome, it sounds like, now depending on what you believe, right? It sounds like that they did try to retain him and he made the final decision to say it's the right time to move on.
Yeah.
Is there anything that when he was here you see on Brady's side or the Belichick side that looked like a kind of a misstep or like, if they were going to really grow together from that point on, this maybe could have been done differently from either side?
Honestly, it's 20 years of experience to look back on, but a 20-year resume with 6 Super Bowls, however many AFC championships, and pieces like that, it's hard to envision that something could have been done differently. The one thing that I have noticed that I am curious about, if this was a sticking point, just my own curiosity as both a fan but just as an observer, is that Brady seems to be more present in social media and more outspoken, and I don't know if that's because he wasn't allowed to as a Patriot. I know there's lots of information about
now,
like
since he's left the Patriots.
Since he's left the Patriots,
He started to do it a little bit more towards the end.
Yeah, and it's hard to tease out whether that was like Belichick was like, keeping a very firm, don't talk to media, don't do these types of things, which I think probably does occur.
Yep.
But also Brady's reaching the end of his career, and he's having to sort of make this transition to, like, I've got to be thinking about life after football. Business mode, right? So it's TB12. It's now, sweaters that say Brady with no Bucks or Patriots thing. It's just Brady.
Yeah. Brady the brand.
Brady the brand, right? So I think that's also part of it. But that would be one thing that I'd be curious to learn more about was that a contentious sticking point between the two of them of Brady wanting to be more outspoken or engage more with the fans on like a social media piece and not having latitude to do that, if that was something that came up. In terms of whether it would affect the wins or loss, it clearly didn't. So I don't know if it would have yielded more Super Bowls or more wins had he had more availability to do some of that stuff. But I wonder if that was like a rotating conversation between the two of them, of Brady wanting to doing it one way of like, I want to be more outspoken or I want to be doing more things like this. I think, if you follow him, his Instagram or his Twitter, or his Instagram especially, is like, it's kind of funny, right? There's like some jokes and things like that when he was the Patriots, you never really saw that stuff. And again, it's hard to tease out whether that's because he wasn't allowed to, because that was sort of coaching rules, or if it's like he's trying to make this shift and be more present because he needs to be thinking about life after football. I don't know the answer to that. That would be sort of, as my observer, that maybe one area that there could have been some contention around that, but because it didn't affect the wins, even if it was, that speaks to both of them that it didn't become Brady. If it were true, Brady especially, that it didn't become a hindrance in him being able to win championships or resentment build or anything like that, because he still was able to be professional and win games even despite that. So that'd be my one area that I would be kind of just curious about, if that was a talking point.
Yeah, it did have a vibe of like just got out of an uptight relationship with an uptight partner, and now I'm free to go frolic and do what I want, right? Kind of thing. And a little bit of that. But what I've seen is that Belichick seems to be doing more stuff like that too, that caught me off guard. I was like, I didn't expect that. Yeah. But I agree with you. It always seemed like being buttoned up and not, I don't want to say exploiting, but not like, really going down the road of like, endorsements and sponsorships and things like that, like really in a crazy direction was something he ever wanted anyone to be doing on that team.
Right.
It does seem like Brady he started to embrace it more towards his end of the time with the Patriots, but then going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers definitely has come more out with it.
Yep.
A couple things that stand out to me, one on each side, I would say. For Brady, him blurring, I wouldn't say crossing a boundary necessarily, because I don't know what their boundaries are, but blurring a boundary, pushing the boundaries a little bit with Alex Guerrero being part of that team when he maybe wasn't welcome to be an integral part of that team. Maybe didn't have permission to have that, have him become an integral part of that team. That seemed to be something that, if you're Belichick, maybe made you feel uncomfortable, right? If you have a certain way of running things, and then all of a sudden this person has their right-hand man coming in to the organization to really work with people.
Who doesn't report to him.
And work with people from a, stretching, strength and conditioning, whatever he does, perspective that may contradict some of the things that the organization wants to do. Like, I can see that being a little bit like, all right, you got your guru, fine, but like, hands off the rest of the team kind of thing. Like, what are we doing? I could see that as being something that, and it seemed like some reports came out like with in-depth knowledge. I don't know if that's accurate, so who knows? But I could see that being something that maybe, maybe started to push the envelope a little bit with that, with their comfort level. And Alex Guerrero even came out on social media before this game recently and said that, in his opinion, Belichick never evolved to accept Brady as more than just a quarterback, which a lot of people disagree. I would actually agree with him on that. This is the one thing on the Belichick side that I think he could have done differently if he really wanted Brady to, at that point. I mean, if they made an offer for him to stay and he didn't, there's clearly something that could have
Right.
been done differently to make him want to stay.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is what stands out. I don't think he ever quite evolved to realize, like, not like the student has become the teacher kind of thing, but
Right.
like, Brady at 23 or 24 taking over for Bledsoe was not Brady at the end. Like, Brady
Right.
at the end saw things differently, sees things differently right now. You can see that Tampa Bay has given him that kind of control over player, like personnel decisions a little bit.
Yep.
Like, hey, you want this receiver? Boom, we're getting him. You want us to do this? Fine. Like,
Yep.
play calling, like all that stuff. To me, I think, I don't know. This is speculation, so we have a no speculation rule. So I apologize for that. So we don't know. We don't know what the relationship was like really in the middle of it with Brady and Belichick at the end. But it seemed like Belichick was very much like, look, you're the quarterback. I make the decisions personnel-wise, and I coach the team. That's what I do. I think that was a missed opportunity because I think Brady, with all his wealth of experience, could have seen things differently and helped in that sense. Now, maybe that did happen and we just didn't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that now is, I mean, it speaks to the talking points among Boston social media and sports media is like has the NFL evolved past Belichick, right? Like that's the conversation that's going on now. Has he been like his ways of coaching is that old ways now? And it speaks to your point of, had he evolved a little bit more and allowed Brady a little bit more control rather than just a player and a little bit more of a manager piece, would things have been different? And I don't know. I guess that's where the speculation comes in because it does seem he has more latitude in Tampa Bay to make some of those decisions, and well, it clearly worked for them last year, which is a whole other conversation. But yeah, I'm curious about that too. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is something that's always confused me a little bit is the hate for Brady outside of New England. I've never really understood that because if you look at the other people that, like, we talked about, like Serena Williams being on like the Mount Rushmore of athletes, and maybe put Simone Biles up there. Who else do we have? Gretzky.
Mm-hmm.
Who else would we put up there?
Jordan.
Yeah, definitely Jordan. It's probably one other one
Phelps.
I'm forgetting. Yep.
Yeah.
So there's athletes that are on that Mount Rushmore. It's more than 4 athletes.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, they're all universally loved
Mm-hmm.
by people inside and outside their market. Jordan, Serena. I think we've talked about black female athletes fitting into 2 categories that get them. Expose them to ridicule that is like ridiculous and over the line. So I think there's that element that she has to deal with. But I think as sports fans, everyone really universally loves her in terms of what she does and her level of excellence and things like that. I don't think anyone hated Gretzky. I'm trying to think of like these, even like someone like Jeter. Look at these athletes and it's like, yeah, there was like a sports hate a little bit.
Right. But there's a respect that comes along with it.
Yeah, but I respected the hell out of Jeter his whole time. Even when I was young and immature and like, that kind of thing. So I don't understand why people seem to hate Brady, particularly because he's such an unhateable guy. Like if you look, I know he's a little, we're going to get to this in a little bit. He's a little quirky about like his things and the pliability and that kind of thing. And he looks like he's somehow found a way to legitimately reverse aging.
Yes.
So there's weird things that are there. I get that. But in terms of him as a person, he's, from everyone that seems to know him, the reports back are that he's just this unbelievably genuine, kind person. And so that's what I don't understand. The guy works his ass off, doesn't throw teammates under the bus, is never promoting drama. Anytime he has a microphone in his face, he says the right thing, and he doesn't say it in a way that to me seems cliche or seems disingenuous. I think he's honest. He just does not want to play that game, and he tries to be nice to everybody. Calls people on their birthday. Like every report you have is that he's just like the nicest person. Why have the non-New England general public seem to pick this person to despise?
I think that there's been this like transition from like frustration to
like jealousy,
hatred, maybe.
Okay.
Right? Like, for example, we'll take the Buffalo Bills. Right? For the last 20 years, they've never really had a chance because Brady's been in the conference, and that's always been. Now they're having success when Brady's gone. But I think that the frustration or maybe jealousy are 2 things that come in. And when you're watching, I think Brady of the Patriots for the last 20 years, it was like, you don't give a lot of credit to like Matthew Slater, who's been busting his ass for years and one of the best special teamers that we'll probably ever see, or any of the countless people that have come through the Patriots for the last 20 years who have been obviously integral parts for them winning. Brady takes the spotlight as like the Patriots, right? And so that's easy for other fans to put it of like, he's the reason we're not winning games and I'm feeling like crap every Sunday. And it's an easy hat to put all the blame and frustration just onto him, right? Deflategate doesn't help that. It gives, again, just another opportunity for confirmation bias. Like, see, this is why he's been so winning, is because he's been cheating, right? And that's a conversation we can have at a different time because I have lots of thoughts about that. But I think it's like frustration that leads to hatred, right? And it's only because you're just frustrated your team isn't winning, and then you see this guy who's the most successful of all. It is interesting though because Gretzky also had that same capability. That dude could take over games, right? Yeah. Michael Phelps, you knew when he was in the pool, he's gonna win,
exactly. If
right?
You're someone else, you're screwed.
You're screwed, right? Simone Biles, same thing. Yeah. And it is interesting, and maybe it speaks to population that predominantly watch football as opposed to gymnastics or tennis. Maybe there's a population difference or a fan difference of like who's watching these sports. I don't know, but that seems to be my best guess of like what's happening. Of people are feeling frustrated, and rather than taking ownership and accountability of like our team just isn't as good, it's this guy is the reason that we're not doing that. And someone who fits sort of similar is LeBron, is sort of a similar phenomenon to Brady, and I would say even less so because listening to not recently, but listening to LeBron, a lot of it is right? Like I did this, not a lot of we. But if you look at his career, he's always been, obviously he's one of the greatest, and we don't have to go through the MJ LeBron debate right now. But he started a school.
MJ's always going to be the greatest.
I know. We agree. That's fine. But like started a school in his hometown to help underprivileged kids like go to school and paying for all of their college. Like he's outside of his basketball, he's been a leader, and he still gets that. And he had the decision and that again.
It's really his only misstep in a career of like how many years now? Like I can't
he's
believe
been in the spotlight since he was like 12, 13 years old.
It is unbelievable. I can't. You take 1,000 people, and I think maybe one will be able to handle it as well as he has.
Yeah, maybe who not turn into that. So those are the two like comparables of they've not really done anything wrong, but have, if you're not a fan or if you're not a Lakers fan or a Miami or where or a Cavaliers fan, you like despised that person. And I was definitely a part of that too. From a fan perspective, from a non-fan perspective, I wildly respect him. But going to Game 7, Eastern Conference Finals, and watching LeBron take over and win that game was a tough game to watch. So those two are sort of, I compare them to, and I think from a fan point, it's just because you're frustrated that your team isn't losing, and rather than just sort of accepting that the team was just better, it's a lot easier to like, I hate that person because they're winning this game.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like people, like the hatred has died down a little bit since he went to Tampa Bay. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's like, and I just didn't think about this till now, but maybe it's a combination of, I would bank it's a combination of a little bit of the winning thing from before when he's with the Patriots, but also the Boston and Belichick hatred. I think a lot of the people a lot of people outside Boston hate Boston. They love to just take shots at Boston as a city, as a fan base, that kind of thing. There's a lot of hatred towards that, and there's a lot of hatred of Belichick because of his smugness. And I think that sort of maybe washed off onto Brady a little bit. Like a lot of the hatred for him was because of the association with those two places. Now that he's away from both those,
right?
And coming out of his shell a little bit, I think maybe a fourth little element is that I don't think people believed he was being genuine when he would have interviews the way he used to and things like that, and be very buttoned up. I think it pissed people off because they thought he was being fake. And that maybe like the real Brady was some enemy or a villain the entire time, and he just wasn't showing his true colors. I think maybe they're starting to see now that was miscalculated, but maybe that's what it was. So it's interesting because one of the things that they showed before the game the other day was an interview with his first roommate. So when he was a fourth string quarterback, realized he made the team, bought a condo outside Foxborough, I think close by, in some other city, some other town. From Ty Law. So Ty Law sold the condo to him, and he asked two other players, like a tight end and some other offensive lineman, I think, to be his roommates. Like, he bought this condo at 3 bedrooms. You guys want to live with me, kind of thing. And they would play Tecmo Bowl, and apparently he was so competitive that like he would stomp the ground sometimes when he was losing because he knew that the rattling of the ground would reset the game. So like I heard that, and I'm like,
awesome.
all right, like maybe this guy really is just willing to go to any length to win.
Yeah.
And some of these stories have some truth to them, but I think. So that always stood out.
I
to
hadn't
me.
heard that story.
Yeah,
That's
that was the
pretty
first
funny.
time I had heard that one. I had heard from his parents that
That's
like
funny.
he used to throw fits when he was playing games, like when he was a young kid with his sisters, and he had
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like his sisters were great athletes too, and one of them is actually married to Kevin Youkilis, a former Red Sox player.
Yep.
So it's a very competitive family, and he would just go nuts if he was in a game like Monopoly or something like that. So I guess it's always been in him. So I had some few other points. I mean, one, I think Brady is like a prime example of grim drive. I think when we talk about like someone who is driven to achieve things that are at the highest level and like relentless commitment to that, while also seemingly maintaining a balance in their life, is there anyone that does it better than Brady? I don't know. It seems like he really excels at that in terms of just structuring his life in a way that allows him to commit to do things, and that is hard. I heard someone say this about him recently, but that it's very hard on your family. I think when we're trying to achieve something that difficult, the time commitment that goes into it, it's such a delicate balance where I think a lot of people fail at one or the other, right? Either they're not able to commit enough time because they don't want something to go wrong with their family, or they commit too much time to achieving the thing and it ruins the family.
Yep.
I think that's a delicate balance to find. It seems like he's found it, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
Brady playing into his 50s, it seems like that is going to happen.
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Yeah, he's always said 45, but now it feels like he's
He
just
said
gonna
recently
keep,
50s,
Yeah,
so
he's
I don't
just
know.
going to keep going and going. Yeah.
He even said, a post-game interview, said, who knows, things can change. Maybe I'll be back in the stadium again at some point. So to me, that's like doesn't sound like anyone who's going to retire anytime soon.
No.
Do you see any comparisons? We're going to wrap up here in a second, but do you see any comparisons between Brady and Tom Cruise, in your opinion?
But just from like a they don't age perspective?
Yeah, in general. There's a lot of like weird similarities. They don't age. Like Tom Cruise is how old? 59?
Yeah, he's almost 60, I think.
59. He's
Yeah.
doing stunts like running across buildings and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
I don't understand what they've tapped into. There is some conspiracy theories that they are just aliens.
Aliens. Yeah,
There was a
absolutely.
movie where Brady did a cameo where he actually went into like a reverse aging chamber. Would you ever see this one?
No.
It's with Paul Rudd.
Oh,
It's-
really? Oh,
it's really
perfect.
funny.
Another example of
Yes,
someone who doesn't age.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But literally in the movie, they have him as a cameo walking out of this clinic that is illegally doing like reverse aging kind of things.
That's awesome.
He just smiles as he walks out.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some similarities there. They've tapped into something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what it is, but do you believe? Last question: do you believe in pliability?
You know what? Honestly, I don't know too much about it. I can't. It works for him, clearly. I guess I don't really know, though, if it does or not. But it seems to help him, and he's committed to it. And I don't know if it's one of those like placebo types of things. Of like, if you firmly believe something, then it becomes
Which is
true,
real.
which is
Yeah,
real.
belief is
right?
powerful.
So maybe there's a combination of that plus that. Again, I don't know too much about pliability. I know that's like his thing. So I don't know enough about it to be able to give like it works. I think it can only help, I imagine, of working on that and being, keeping your muscles in a place that they need to be, so they can recover, but also can perform. So, on the surface, it seems like it's something that would work well. There are things that Alex has done in the past that I have questions about. So I think that definitely hinders my ability to believe, right? Because some of the things that he's claimed in the past, I'm not bringing this up to shoot him down.
Yeah.
But it certainly puts a little bit of curiosity.
Yep.
I guess I'll say that.
Yep.
Curiosity into the methods as well.
Yeah, and they've gotten rid of some of that stuff. I know
Yeah.
the things that have been more sort of controversial and not evidence-based, I
Right.
think they've done well to just remove those over
Yep.
the last like 3, 4, or 5 years.
Yep.
But I agree. I think, look, the way I look at the whole pliability thing is that it's not a cure-all, right? I mean, I don't think that anything is in life is just a fix-all for anybody or
No.
any situation. And yet, if you believe in something and it leads to, you staying in really, really good shape and living a healthy lifestyle, and leads to you believing that you're capable of healing or doing like belief does matter. So I think those two things probably lead to what makes it so effective.
Yeah, and I think it probably
especially.
dictates his decisions to do certain things.
Yeah.
If it's another healthy thing he's doing, that keeps his mind in a healthy place, right?
Agreed.
Which I think is probably, again, speculating. I don't know the science behind it, but for me, that would be more important, keeping a healthy mind, than it would be working on like pliability.
Agreed.
Necessarily.
Yep.
So
yeah, for sure. So that's it for today. Want to remind everyone just to check us out on YouTube, the Grim Drive podcast, and hit subscribe if you can. All the helpful info and links we described today can be accessed in the show notes. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Grim Drive podcast for our discussion about Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and relationships. We will be back next week to talk about sports and salary.
Thanks, everyone.